when you're doing van life, you're always living in a state of fun and adventure, but you're also constantly in a state of fear. Can I park here? Where am I going vexed? Is it safe here? Safe from animals, safe from people, right? So let me tell you about the biggest fears that I had while I was doing the van life. And I did it for a while, and I'm no longer currently doing it. So as I've switched back to living in house, it becomes more obvious some of the fears that you have while you're doing it. So what were some of the fears? I think because we've driven around in a car a lot already, I personally didn't tend to feel very afraid generally when I'm in a city or near things, right? It doesn't feel that different because you've driven to places before. So unless you're in the neighborhood that looks like obviously really dangerous, you just don't really feel a sense of fear in your car. Now, I'll say it's a little bit different at night, like when you're parking. But again, you have that feeling of like being in a car, and so you generally feel pretty protected. And then there's also the element of if you needed to, you could kind of hop in the car and drive off, I guess. But generally, I wasn't going to park the car somewhere that I didn't feel so comfortable to walk around in. So really the car felt like an additional layer of security. Well, when I start camping out in the middle of nowhere, now someone coming from the East Coast, the places that I had camped before, I had never really dealt with this concept of bears. So if you're familiar, that's great. Some of you might not be, but I wonder if it's a little bit like sharps, like where if you're not from the area, you just hear so much warnings about them. But the reality is it's like really nothing to think about. It's so rare that like you just go about your life. You're literally more likely to get struck by lightning than to get attacked by a shark. So people that have been from areas where they go to a beach occasionally, like you just don't think about sharks. But I know people who are from areas where they don't have beach, like they're really freaking out about the sharks. But like jellyfish, you should honestly worry more about, or lightning. So going into this new territory where there are bears, and I just never was used to that, that became actually a big fear of mine. And I don't know if that was justified, but it was just the concept of if there was one, that it could quickly become a big issue. And the thing is, like, versus camping, like if you're camping for just a weekend, you know, okay, we're gonna like prepare all of our supplies, put the food in the whatever, follow all the rules. There's all these rules that you're supposed to do to be like extra safe if there's bears around, because they smell it and they really want the food. They're not trying to attack you, but if you are in between them and what seems like good food, then that might become a problem. So just knowing that in the back of my mind was kind of a fear. Anytime I would go somewhere where it was bear country, I mean, it was really quite impossible for me to do any sort of preparations and with the food, because it's like, I'm just eating, you know, and I got food that bears would really like in the whole campsite. They would really be most interested in my car. So I would have fish and all sorts of, who knows, maybe some beef jerky, like really the best bear treats. And even if I had the food in the fridge, you know, I got the plates and the wrappers in a garbage bag. And, you know, how insulated is the van? Not very much. And I got the fan mounting. So it's like, it's not sealed up. It's not tied to a tree 30 feet in the air or whatever you're supposed to do. He could smell it for sure. If there was a bear, he would be smelling it. And mine would be a very interesting vehicle for him. And if you see some videos of these bears, now I'm not trying to scare you about bears, do your own research. But what I'm trying to explain is how you can just being aware of certain things, and some of them are real risks. It's just a fear that sits in the back of your mind, right? And so the idea that I could just be comfortably sleeping in my van and then some massive, powerful creature could just come, start trying to rip the doors off, not because it wants to kill me, but because there's some good smelling food in there. You know, that becomes a legitimate fear that affects you while you're sleeping. You hear noises, you're thinking about where you're parking, things like that. So that was a legitimate fear. And honestly, that became a bigger fear of mine than people. Like I was way less concerned when I'm out in the woods about having some sort of issue with people. So that was a bigger fear. Now, I will say that changed. Soon I got over my fear of bears when I had my other encounter, which was one of the biggest fears and scariest encounters I had later in the van life. So there's sort of a thing where there's a certain level of people when there's enough people, personally, I feel more comfortable because at least I'm not the only target, right? So it's not just are people a threat. Of course, a person could be a threat, an animal can be a threat, but people are a threat even if you don't see them, right? And probably the most threatening ones could be the ones that you don't even know are there. But when there's other people, at least there's other targets or proof that the other targets aren't being attacked, right? So you don't have to be the fastest one, just don't be the slowest one if you want to, survive. So when you're going out into the middle of nowhere sometimes and you're the only one or you're one of just a couple, that to me was some of the more scary moments because it really matters who those other people are. If you've got 50 people on the campsite, 20 people, if there's one crazy person, then there's a lot of other people to defend from it and you're not the only target, right? So what happened with me, I'm somewhere far out in the desert, maybe near Nevada or something. And, a lot of times when you're, of course, for this lifestyle, you're going to places you haven't been before. And some of them haven't really been vetted very well or things change over time, There can always be a new crazy person, a new bear to show up or something like this, right? And so even if it's vetted, by the time you get there, it's not necessarily currently vetted, right? So you're going to an unknown place. So I go to this place and I had just driven like a couple hours and making my way along somewhere else. And I get there to the spot. It's one of those free spots you find online. And it was a good spot. But when I tell you it was empty, I mean, dozens and dozens of spaces that were available and just no one there. Big area, nice land. I was like, okay, cool, very good. But actually, there was one other car off in the distance. And as soon as I park my thing, I park it on the other side. So it's like, they have their whole half. I got my whole half. It's quite far away. Only the car starts moving. And it's like this old beat down truck kind of camper situation, but not really. Anyways, the guy comes over, starts talking to me, asking me about the satellites on my van and saying he remembers me from a few days ago, which recall I just got there. And I'm like, no, definitely wasn't me. But I'd had a white camper van. It's quite a common vehicle. If you've ever camped before, surely you've seen one of these once a week, maybe even twice a week. And so I assume this fella has camped before. He knows that, but he's quite insistent. No, I remember you. But even with that, he's really quite confused about the satellites on my van. No, it's satellites. What are you talking about? About the solar panels? I'm like, you think you've seen this van before? Which you have because it's a very common van, but you don't know what solar panels are? I'm like, anyways, it's all starting to get a little bit weird. And so, when he drove over, started talking to me, I just assumed either sometimes you get people who are kind of managing the place or just been there. They want to like see what's up, what's going on. That's normal. But clearly this was becoming more of a different thing, right? And then anyways, he proceeds to start showing me photos on his phone of the UFOs that he saw and talking about men in hoods that would come and hang out in his campsite. I'm thinking like, I don't know. Look, I'm not afraid of any of these things he's talking about. I don't know if he's legitimate making to it. I don't know what's going on. It's getting dark, about to get dark, and just wanted to sleep and go on somewhere else the next day. But anyways, it was quickly becoming clear that this guy's mental state was such that whatever fear I had ever had about a bear, that was a real fear. But at least bears are rational. At least bears aren't going to be concerned that I'm the feds here with satellites trying to abduct him and not going to come try to slash my tires and murder me, right? And so it became obvious that my biggest fear was not like normal people trying to like get an opportunity. Your biggest fear is crazy people, because unlike a bear, bears are rational. They just want the food, right? But then others are strategic about it. They're just going to like brute force their way into the food. And so if a bear starts slamming on your vehicle, we shouldn't give up and drive off, probably. But when you have a crazy person, they are not rational and they're strategic about it. So they're not just going to come and start smacking the van. They'll slash the tires so now you can't drive off. Or they'll try to like incapacitate you because they're convinced that you're an alien, right? So it became clear that this is actually one of the bigger threats. This is a very big fear. And so obviously, it was quite clear that dude probably then a little bit intoxicated on some substances, not sleeping properly. And so it became clear that I needed to get out of that campsite, which I did, which was quite frustrating because the next available one was about an hour away and I'd already been driving for hours, and then could find myself in a similar situation. You don't know what you're getting when you get there, right? And so that's probably one of the worst incidents that happened to me. But the fear is that I'm in the middle of nowhere and it's just me and this guy. And so it's like this kind of guy exists when you're in the city. But like I said, I'm not the only target. It's not just target. I'm not the only object of interest. You know, if that guy was in downtown, he thinks everyone is an alien trying to capture him. So he's not trying to target and, you know, murder or incapacitate anyone in particular. He probably just hides under a rock. But if he's alone out there and it's just me, it becomes clear to him that he just needs to get rid of me and then all his problems are solved. Right. And so that becomes a fear that you have when there's no one else around. So I'm actually much more fearful to be out in the middle of nowhere in a way than to be in civilization. There's a different kind of fear. And so when you're doing the van life, that's just something you have to deal with. You have to deal with kind of being on that edge of knowing, like, when in and then of nowhere, you're kind of on your own. And at the same time, you are an object of interest to animals and to people. And because you're on your own, that makes you much more interesting. All of the attention is on you, right? And for the most part, because you're out in the middle of nowhere, there are less threats to be interested in you. But you kind of have to manage that. And so that's just a fear that's going to be in the back of your mind. And you don't necessarily notice it while you're doing. You're just kind of always in a state of like this vigilance of just like being aware of your surroundings, what's going on. Like if you're sleeping and you hear the slightest noise, you kind of need to pay attention to that, right? And then so having done that lifestyle, living like that, you know, it can affect your ability to kind of like just chew and sleep, you know, versus like being in a house where it's like you don't have to think about that stuff, you know. Like I'm not worried about an animal. I'm not worried about someone trying to come break in or something. I mean, much less than when you're in a car. And the way that they would do it wouldn't be like some deranged person who is convinced that you are aliens with Fed, right? So here's with van life. I would say that's one of the biggest fears. And then, of course, normal fears like getting stopped somewhere or stranded somewhere. But if those are new ones, because those are ones where you're just driving a car, it's really the like living in the vehicle and then realizing that like this is your shelter, this is your home. And so that's anytime you move it, that's something you have to think about. It's constantly on your mind. Like, have I done this in a way that's safe? Because anytime you change to you're always out in the nowhere, but anytime you change to a new woods, and those new creatures, there's new potential people. And so something you have to think about. So while I was doing it, I always preferred, you can not just literally, but it's just a feeling. Like I wanted to get there before sunset. Anytime I got to a new spot, but it didn't feel good if I couldn't see it in the light, right? Maybe it's just intuition, maybe it's logic, I don't know. But I always had this thing, like it was sort of, I considered it bad luck or just bad practice. Occasionally you had to for travel, but really it was best to design gigs in a way that you could get somewhere before sunset. And plus you get to watch the sunset. But just the way that you would feel, the fear that I'm talking about, the comfort, or just a sense of like, you know, I don't really feel like, I didn't really feel like it was shelter, like it was home, like I was comfortable somewhere if I hadn't seen it in the daylight. Like you would just show up in the dark, you didn't really sleep right that night, I felt like. So that would be a tip starting out. Just get there during the day, make sure everything feels right. And for me, obviously in that story, I got somewhere during that day. And thank goodness I did, because it not just didn't feel right, it was not right. And if I had got there at night, imagine how that guy felt about me during the day when he had a chance to talk to me. You know, imagine he just wakes up and sees this vehicle with satellites that was there the night before watching him, which it wasn't, right? Could have ended really badly, right? It's just me and him out in the middle of nowhere. So don't let that stop you. Look, I did it for a little while, enjoyed it, stopped doing it. And if I were to do it again, that wasn't a big reason for me stopping. I would still do it, keeping that in mind, but it does limit your options. Limit some of the ways that you plan your travel and design your travel. So there are good things and bad things to do in this lifestyle. If you're interested, just trying to keep you a balanced perspective and maybe consider some other alternatives. So if you enjoyed that, thanks for watching and consider watching again maybe.